All right, get ready, because today we're going deep into PI planning.
Ooh, PI planning.
And trust me, it's a lot more exciting than it might sound at first.
Yeah.
It's about getting entire teams on the same page.
Yeah.
So you can really launch those big projects that you've been thinking about and hoping for.
Yeah.
And our guide for this deep dive is going to be the ultimate guide to PI planning.
PI plan is really like the heartbeat of the Scaled Agile Framework or SAFe. It happens every 8 to 12 weeks and brings all the teams together on the Agile release train. So
it's not just some random meeting. It's a vital part of how these teams actually...
a core part of the system.
Function.
Yeah.
So before we get into like the actual event, I'm curious about like all the people involved. Who are the key players that make PI planning happen?
Yeah, well, each role that's involved in PI planning, each person brings something unique to the table. You could think of it like a movie set. You've got, the director and the producers and the actors, and they all have to work together to make the masterpiece.
Okay, so I'm with you. I'm picturing it.
Okay.
Who would be like the director of our PI planning kind of event?
Okay, so the director in this case would be the release train engineer, or RTE.
Okay.
They're the one that keeps everything on track and makes sure the whole process runs smoothly and helps the teams get around roadblocks.
They're like the conductor of an orchestra, making sure everyone's in sync.
Precisely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're responsible for the overall success and flow of the event.
Yep.
But what about the people that set the vision for what we're actually building?
Yeah.
Like, who are the producers in our movie analogy?
Okay, so that would be two key players, actually, the product manager and the product owner.
Okay.
The product manager is like the visionary,
Right.
They're the one that paints the big picture of where the product is going and what needs to get built. And they're also responsible for making sure everyone understands why we're doing the work.
Okay.
The why behind the work.
So they're setting like the destination, but how do we figure out the journey? How do we get there?
That is where the product owner comes in.
Okay.
So they focus on the details, making sure that the team is building the right things and that those things are aligned with what the customers actually need.
Okay.
They work with the backlog a lot, prioritizing features and refining user stories and getting everything ready for the development team to actually start working on.
So the product manager sets the big vision, and the product owner translates that into like actionable steps and tasks.
Exactly.
Okay, I got it. But what about the people who actually build the product?
Yes.
The
stars of the show.
Like, who are the actors on set?
The developers?
The developers.
Yes.
Okay.
They're the builders. They solve the problems.
Right.
They take those ideas and turn them into reality. So they look at the features, they estimate how much work they can do, they identify risks, and they work with other teams to make sure that everything actually fits together.
But no movie set would run smoothly without, the people behind the scenes to keep things organized and running.
Right.
Who's that in PI planning?
Yeah, that is the Scrum Master.
Okay.
So they are the facilitator, the problem solver. They remove obstacles so that the development team can actually focus on building the software.
They're like the stage managers.
Yeah, exactly.
Making sure everything goes according to plan.
Yes.
So we've got our cast of characters, we've got the RTE keeping everything on track, we've got the product manager setting the vision, the product owner outlining those details, the developers building the product, and the Scrum Master clearing the path for them.
Yes.
So now I want to know what actually happens during these 2 days of PI planning.
Okay.
What's the schedule like?
You can think of it like a 2-act play. Day 1 is all about setting the stage, making sure everyone understands the vision, and starting to plan out the journey ahead. Okay. And it all starts with a presentation about the business context.
So we're starting with like the big picture.
Yeah.
Why are we doing this?
Exactly.
What's the impact?
Yes.
How does it connect to the company's goals?
Yeah, it's super important to make sure everyone understands the business context before you dive into the specifics. So, a company like Tesla, their business context is all about accelerating the transition to sustainable energy.
Right.
And that context really influences all their product decisions and planning.
So I'm starting to see why that first step is so important.
Yeah.
What happens after everyone's on board with the big why?
Then comes the fun part, which is unveiling the product vision.
Ooh.
So the product manager gets to present the roadmap for the upcoming program increment, and it's like a sneak peek into the future of the product.
Like a trailer for the next big blockbuster.
Yeah.
All right, so we've got the big picture, we've got the product vision.
Yeah.
What comes next?
Then we got to lay the foundation for success.
Okay.
So the system architect will walk everyone through the architecture vision and explain how everything fits together from a technical point of view. And then a senior development manager might talk about the best practices for development to make sure everyone's on the same page.
So it's like making sure everyone speaks the same language before we start writing the script.
Yeah.
Okay.
Then the real work begins, which is the team breakouts.
Okay.
So each team will get together and dive deep into those features, and they'll break them down into smaller chunks and estimate how much they can actually achieve in the program increment.
I bet those breakouts are really buzzing with activity.
Oh yeah, a lot of energy.
So the teams are planning their own work, but they also need to consider how it impacts other teams, right?
Oh, for sure. Collaboration is key in PI planning. Teams have to identify potential risks and dependencies and figure out where their work might overlap with other teams.
Okay.
And all of that gets visualized on the program board, which is like a big puzzle board.
Okay.
Showing how all the pieces fit together.
So that keeps everyone on the same page?
Yes.
What happens after the teams have had a chance to, really hash things out?
Then it's time for a gut check.
Okay.
Which is the draft plan review.
Okay.
So each team will present their initial plan, and they talk about their capacity, the work they're going to do, their objectives, the risks and dependencies. And this is where the business owners, product managers, and other stakeholders can give feedback and make sure that everybody is moving in the right direction.
So it's like a first rehearsal before the big premiere?
Precisely.
But what if there are disagreements or major roadblocks that come up?
That's where day one ends.
Okay.
It ends with the management review and problem-solving session.
Okay. So does it get intense?
It can get pretty intense. Everybody's working together to resolve issues and negotiate maybe scope changes and make sure that the plan is actually realistic and aligned with the strategic goals.
So by the end of day one, we've got like a draft plan, feedback has been shared, problems have been addressed.
Yeah.
What's on the agenda for day two?
Day two is all about refining that plan and getting everybody energized to execute it.
Okay.
So we start with a recap of any adjustments that were made to the plan based on the discussions from day one.
Okay.
And then it's back to team breakouts for round two.
So this time they're finalizing their objectives and getting those commitments from the business owners.
Yeah, they're really solidifying their game plan for the program increment.
Okay.
And the business owners play a really key role here by assigning business value to each objective so that the work is prioritizing what's most important strategically.
And then comes the final presentation, right?
Yes, the final plan review.
Okay.
Each team gets to present their polished plan. They talk about their objectives, risks, dependencies, anything that could impact their ability to deliver.
Right.
And the goal here is to get that final stamp of approval from the business owners that they're committing to support the team's efforts.
So it's like opening night, the curtain's about to rise.
Exactly.
Everyone's ready to see the final performance.
Yep.
But before the curtain rises, we need to talk about risks.
Oh, yes, you're right.
Remember all those potential risks that the teams identified?
Right.
Well, now is the time to have a real discussion about them.
Okay.
And to categorize them into 4 buckets.
Okay.
We have resolved, owned, accepted, and mitigated.
So we're not just identifying the risks, we're figuring out how to deal with them.
Exactly.
Can you give me an example of what each of those categories means?
Sure. So imagine that a team identified a risk related to a new technology they're using. If they feel confident after discussing it that they can handle it, then that risk would be resolved.
But let's say there's a risk of a key team member being unavailable during a critical phase. If they find a backup or adjust the plan to accommodate that absence, then that risk would be mitigated. Owned means somebody is taking responsibility for monitoring and managing a risk that can't be fully resolved.
Right.
And then some risks are just, part of doing business, like a potential shift in market demand.
Right.
Then those would be accepted risks.
So this process makes risk management a lot more transparent and actionable.
Yes, definitely.
Okay, so once we've tackled the risks, it's time to kind of gauge everyone's confidence in the plan, right?
Exactly. And for that, we often use the fist of 5 voting method.
Okay, fair to that.
So imagine the team gathered, everybody votes on their confidence level in achieving the PI objectives. And a fist means no confidence, and 5 fingers means, full confidence.
Right.
So it's a quick and visual way to get a sense of how the team's feeling.
And what happens if the confidence level isn't where it needs to be?
If the average vote is below 3,
Okay.
then it's time to dig deeper.
Right.
So anyone who voted 2 fingers or less shares their concerns.
Okay.
And that might lead to adding new risks, adjusting the plan, or having further discussions.
So it sounds like PI planning encourages open communication and collaboration all throughout the process.
Absolutely.
Okay. And finally, we wrap up day 2 with a really crucial element, the planning retrospective.
Yes, that's a chance for everyone to reflect on the PI planning process itself, what went well, what could be improved, and how to make the next one even better.
So even the PI planning process itself is subject to continuous improvement.
It's all connected.
I love that.
Yeah.
So PI planning is not just a one-and-done event.
No, it's a launch pad, the beginning of a journey.
Right. And there's a whole lot that happens after those 2 days.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Of intense planning.
Yeah.
And I'm eager to learn more about that, but we're running out of time for this part of our deep dive.
Okay. So let's take a break and then we'll come back and delve into that next member.
Sounds good.
I think you'll find it interesting.
Okay.
Yeah. So, one of the things that people often forget about is what happens after those 2 days of planning.
Right.
It's kind of like you're setting off on an expedition.
Okay.
You've got your map, you've got your supplies, you've got your team, but the real adventure begins when you hit the trail.
Okay, that's a great analogy. So we've got our plan, we've got everybody all aligned and excited.
Yeah.
But what are the key steps that actually happen after the PI planning event?
So first things first, the teams have to take those objectives and break them down into actionable next steps.
Okay.
They need to figure out, how to coordinate their schedules,
Right.
how to establish communication rhythms, and make sure everyone's on the same page for the work that's coming.
So it's like taking that big map and turning it into a detailed itinerary.
Precisely.
Okay.
Outlining each leg of the journey.
Okay.
And remember, all those plans,
Right.
all those dependencies, the user stories, all of that needs to be documented in a clear and accessible way.
Okay.
A lot of organizations use tools like Jira or Monday.com
Great.
to keep everything organized and transparent so everyone can track the progress and understand the plan.
It's like having a shared journal where everyone can see the expedition's progress.
Yeah.
Exactly. But the real excitement is in the execution phase.
Oh, absolutely. That's where the teams really put those plans into action.
Right.
They're testing, and they're actually delivering value based on the commitments they made.
So we finally set sail. The adventure is really underway.
Yes.
But we don't just charge ahead full steam, right?
Right. There are regular check-ins and adjustments along the way.
Okay.
Especially if you have multiple agile release trains. It's like having several ships sailing together on this expedition.
Okay.
They need to synchronize and make sure their plans are aligned.
So even though each ship has its own course, they're all part of a larger fleet working towards the same destination.
Exactly.
What are those synchronization points like?
They might involve, teams presenting their progress, highlighting any roadblocks that they've encountered, and discussing any dependencies between the trains. Think of it as the ship captains meeting to share intel and adjust their course.
Got it. So there's constant communication even after the initial planning.
Oh, yes.
Okay. What about incorporating feedback?
That's a key part of staying agile.
Right.
Throughout the program, increment product owners are actively seeking feedback from customers and incorporating it into the product to make sure it stays aligned with their needs and expectations.
So it's like checking the compass, making sure we're still headed in the right direction.
Exactly.
Even if we need to adjust the course.
Right.
Okay, and those regular inspect and adapt sessions that we talked about before are really key for continuous improvement.
Yes. They give teams a dedicated time for reflection. What's working well? What needs tweaking? How can we optimize our process for the future?
So it's a continuous loop of planning, executing, reflecting, adapting, and always staying focused on delivering value.
Exactly.
I love this expedition analogy.
Good.
It really captures that dynamic and iterative nature of PI planning.
Yeah, it's a good one.
But even with the best planning and collaboration, there are going to be challenges that come up, right?
Oh, for sure.
What are some common pitfalls that teams might encounter along the way?
So one common pitfall is insufficient preparation.
Okay.
It's like setting off on that expedition without packing enough food or studying the terrain.
Right.
Teams need to have a clear understanding of the why behind the work, a well-defined backlog, and prioritized features before they can even start the planning process.
So if you rush into planning without doing your homework, you might end up lost in the wilderness.
Exactly.
What other traps should we be aware of?
Poor time management can really derail a PI planning event. It's like trying to cram a week's worth of hiking into a single day.
Right.
You're going to end up exhausted and off track.
Right.
Sticking to the agenda.
Okay.
Allocating enough time for those team breakouts and plan reviews, and really keeping the discussions focused are all super important for good time management.
Okay, time is precious, especially when we're trying to deliver something amazing.
Yes.
What about stakeholder engagement?
Oh, that's crucial.
Right.
It's like forgetting to invite the expedition sponsors to the celebratory feast at the end.
Right.
If you don't involve those key stakeholders in the process, or if you don't get buy-in from leadership, you're going to end up with misaligned priorities and a lack of support down the road.
So it's all about shared ownership and a sense of purpose.
Absolutely.
Another challenge I could see is managing those dependencies between teams.
Yeah.
Especially when you have multiple teams working on different parts of the product.
Yes, that can be tricky. Imagine, two teams needing to cross the same river, but only one has a boat.
Right.
If you don't identify and manage those dependencies, you're going to create bottlenecks and delays.
Okay.
So it's crucial to visualize those dependencies, to communicate clearly, and to work together to find solutions.
So clear communication and collaboration are essential for navigating those dependencies.
Makes sense.
Okay. What other pitfalls should we watch out for?
One trap that a lot of teams fall into is overemphasizing estimation.
Okay.
It's like spending hours debating the exact distance to the next campsite instead of just starting to hike.
Right.
While estimation is important,
Yeah.
spending too much time on granular details can actually be counterproductive.
Right. So it's finding that balance between planning and taking action.
Exactly.
What about team dynamics?
Yes.
I imagine those can make or break the success of the PI planning event.
It's so important to have a positive and inclusive environment for collaboration to really flourish. Think of it like a team of explorers who trust and support each other. If you ignore conflicts, if you don't address issues quickly, or if you fail to celebrate the successes, it's going to create tension and hinder the team's ability to work well together.
It's like those explorers really need to have each other's backs even when things get tough.
Exactly.
What other advice would you give to teams to help them avoid these pitfalls?
One key tip is to regularly review past PI performance.
Okay.
It's like studying the maps from previous expeditions, taking note of what worked well, what challenges were encountered, and how those lessons can inform the current journey.
Okay.
And of course, those planning retrospectives are crucial. Skipping them or not implementing the improvements based on the feedback is like refusing to learn from your mistakes.
So it's about embracing that growth mindset.
Yes.
And looking for ways to continuously improve both the product and the process. And with the rise of remote work, I imagine facilitating PI planning in a virtual environment presents its own set of challenges.
Oh, for sure. It's a whole new ballgame.
Right.
It's like trying to coordinate that expedition with team members scattered across different continents.
Okay.
You lose that in-person energy and those spontaneous interactions that can spark creativity.
Right.
So if you don't adapt the process for remote teams, if you don't choose the right collaboration tools, or if you neglect to foster that connection and engagement, virtual PI planning can be a lot less effective.
So just like exploring uncharted territory requires specialized equipment and skills, virtual PI planning requires a different approach.
Yes.
Okay, what are some key considerations for making it work smoothly?
So first of all, choosing the right tools is super important.
Okay.
Video conferencing platforms, breakout rooms, digital whiteboards, shared documents. Those are all essential to replicate the energy of an in-person event. Okay. But tools alone aren't enough.
Right. You need that intentional communication and engagement.
Exactly. Clear expectations, frequent check-ins, and using a variety of different communication channels are all really important. And, just like those explorers gathering around the campfire at night.
Yeah.
It's a good idea to build in some time for informal virtual interactions.
To
help foster that sense of camaraderie.
So it's about adapting the process choosing the right tools, and prioritizing communication and connection, even when teams are physically separated.
Yes.
But I'm curious, beyond the practical aspects, what's the real magic of PI planning? What makes it so transformative for teams and organizations?
So beyond just the mechanics of planning, PI planning is really about creating a culture of alignment, transparency, and continuous improvement.
Okay.
It's about giving teams the power to take ownership, to collaborate effectively, and to deliver exceptional results.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's more than just a process, it's a way of working that can really change how teams function and innovate.
Exactly.
So we've talked about the journey, the potential pitfalls, and how important it is to adapt to this new world of work. But I'm curious about the actual tools and techniques. What makes PI planning tick? What are some of the things that teams use to make this whole process a success?
One tool that comes to mind right away is the program board.
Okay.
It's like a cornerstone of PI planning.
Okay.
Imagine a big wall, almost like a giant puzzle board, covered in sticky notes, and each one of those notes represents a feature or a dependency or a milestone.
I've heard about these. They're like a visual roadmap for the whole Agile release train.
Exactly. And it's not just static. It evolves as the PI planning event goes on and even afterwards.
Okay.
So as teams find those dependencies and make changes, the board changes too.
Okay.
It creates this shared understanding and a living visual representation of the plan.
So it's a really dynamic tool that keeps everyone on the same page. Are there digital versions of these program boards?
Oh yeah, for sure.
Okay.
Tools like Jira Align and Monday Dev, even simple spreadsheets can be used to create digital program boards that everyone on the team can access.
So whether you prefer the physical sticky notes or the digital version, it's really about having that visual representation that everyone can understand and contribute to.
Exactly.
Speaking of keeping everyone on the same page, we talked about the confidence vote earlier. What other techniques are helpful for making sure everyone's aligned and communicating openly?
The confidence vote is such a powerful tool.
Yeah.
It's not just about, getting buy-in. It's about creating space for honest conversation. When you can address those concerns right away, you build trust and you create a more resilient plan.
Have you seen teams use any other methods for the confidence vote?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I once worked with a team that used Roman voting instead of fists and fingers. They had green cards for yes, yellow for maybe, and red for no, and they would hold up the card to represent their confidence level.
Interesting.
It was fun and engaging, but it still gave them that transparency and encouraged those open discussions.
That's a great example of how teams can really adapt the process to fit their style.
Yeah.
And speaking of adapting, one of the biggest challenges facing organizations today is how to run an effective PI planning event in a hybrid or remote work environment.
It's tough. When you can't get everyone together in the same room, you lose that in-person energy and those unplanned conversations that can lead to great ideas.
So how do we bridge that gap? How do we create that connection and engagement when people are miles apart?
You have to be really intentional about using technology and communication.
Okay.
Video conferencing platforms like Zoom or Microsoft Teams are important, but it's not enough just to see each other's faces.
Right.
You have to use features like breakout rooms for team discussions and digital whiteboards to kind of replicate that program board experience.
And being mindful of time zones and Zoom fatigue.
Oh yeah, for sure.
Right.
It's better to have shorter, more frequent sessions than trying to cram everything into 2 long days.
Okay.
And don't forget to build in some time for those casual interactions, like virtual coffee breaks or online games can help build those relationships.
So it's really about being intentional and creative in how you design that virtual PI planning experience.
Yeah.
But beyond all the tools and logistics, what are some of the less tangible things that make PI planning successful no matter what the environment?
You're talking about the human element.
Right.
It's all about creating a culture of trust and psychological safety where people feel comfortable taking risks, sharing their ideas and asking for help when they need it.
Because when you have that foundation of trust, then communication is easier and collaboration flows naturally.
Exactly.
Right.
Leaders have a big responsibility here.
Okay.
They need to show vulnerability, be open to feedback, and make it okay to make mistakes and learn from them.
So it's not just about having the right processes. It's about building a culture that supports those agile values.
Precisely. And when you do that, PI planning becomes more than just a planning event. It becomes something that sparks innovation and helps teams achieve ambitious goals.
I like it. It's a journey and not just a destination.
Yes.
So as we wrap up our deep dive, is there any final message you'd like to leave our listeners with?
I think the most important thing to remember is that PI planning is really about people. It's about bringing different perspectives together, empowering teams, and creating a sense of purpose.
That's a great message. Thank you so much for sharing your expertise with us today.
You're welcome. It was my pleasure.
And for our listeners, we encourage you to think about how you can apply these PI planning principles to your own work, your own teams, even your personal projects.
Yeah.
There's always something new to learn.
That's right.
And more to achieve when we use Agile thinking.
Absolutely.
Thanks for joining us on The Deep Dive.